Country singer-songwriter David Allan Coe has died at the age of 86.
He's responsible for the songs You Never Even Called Me by My Name and The Ride.
David Allan Coe was one of country music's most rebellious and controversial legends. Rising from prison to stardom, he built a career marked by hardship, success, and constant controversy. Through every challenge, he poured his experiences into his music and refused to be forgotten. But after decades of triumphs and struggles, his story took a heartbreaking turn. What really happened to the outlaw legend, and what led to the final chapter of his remarkable life? The tragic ending of David Allan Coe. For decades, David Allan Coe lived a life that was filled with controversy, rebellion, success, and hardship. From spending years behind prison walls to becoming one of the most unforgettable voices in American country music, he built a career unlike anyone else's. But even the toughest journeys eventually come to an end. As the years passed, the man who had spent a lifetime fighting every obstacle could no longer outrun time itself. Then, on April 29, 2026, David Allan Coe's remarkable and complicated story came to its final chapter. When David Allan Coe passed away at the age of 86, the news quickly spread across the country. He died while receiving medical care in a hospital, bringing an end to a life that had been as turbulent as it was unforgettable. Although reports noted that he had been living with long-term health problems, including breathing difficulties, no official cause of death was immediately released. His wife, Kimberly Hastings Coe, later confirmed his passing in a heartfelt statement to Rolling Stone, leaving fans to reflect on the extraordinary life he had lived. Even after becoming a successful artist, David Allan Coe never escaped the personal struggles that had followed him for most of his life. That contrast became one of the defining parts of his story. On stage, he remained a powerful performer who connected deeply with loyal fans. Away from the spotlight, however, his life was often shaped by controversy, difficult decisions, personal battles, and challenges that never completely disappeared. As time went on, the hard life he had lived slowly began to leave its mark. David Allan Coe continued performing well into his later years because music remained at the center of his life. But age and declining health gradually became impossible to ignore. Reports suggested that he had been dealing with ongoing breathing problems, along with other health complications that often come with growing older. Public appearances became less frequent, and the powerful energy that had once defined him slowly began to fade. Although many reports pointed to years of declining health and respiratory problems, no single official cause of death was confirmed at the time. Instead, his passing reflected the effects of advancing age, years of physical struggles, and the gradual decline that comes after a lifetime of hardship, constant touring, and relentless living. His death was not completely unexpected, but it still carried enormous emotional weight because it marked the end of one of country music's most unusual and unforgettable lives. David Allan Coe's legacy is anything but simple. He was not loved by everyone, and he was not accepted by all, but he was never ignored. He changed country music by refusing to become anyone other than himself. In an industry where many artists tried to fit in, Coe stood apart by living life entirely on his own terms. David Allan Coe's life was difficult, controversial, and impossible to forget. From prison cells to concert stages, from rejection to legendary status, he experienced a journey that few people could ever imagine. In the end, what made his story unforgettable was not that it was perfect, but that it was real. His final chapter closed the book on a life filled with struggle, determination, and unforgettable music, leaving behind a legacy that will continue to be remembered for generations. Coe's wife, Kimberly Hastings Coe, confirmed the singer's death in a statement to Rolling Stone. She described him as one of the best singers, songwriters, and performers of our time, never to be forgotten. She added, "My husband, my friend, my confidant, and my life for many years. I'll never forget him, and I don't want anyone else to ever forget him either." Before David Allan Coe's tragic ending, Were there hidden signs that revealed the struggles he was facing all along? Keep watching to find out. David Allan Coe's final years. By the mid-2000s, David Allan Coe's career was no longer receiving the same level of attention it once had, but that did not mean he was ready to walk away. He was still performing, still traveling, and still stepping onto stages in front of the fans who had remained loyal to him for decades. But while his determination remained strong, time was beginning to leave its mark. Years of hard living, endless touring, personal struggles, and constant public controversy had slowly taken a heavy toll on both his physical health and emotional state. The signs of aging and exhaustion were becoming harder to ignore. Health problems began to appear more frequently.
Country music artist David Allan Coe has been hospitalized,
including respiratory issues and painful joint problems that made the demands of life on the road much more difficult. The same lifestyle that had helped create his legendary outlaw image was now beginning to affect him in serious ways. Yet, even as his body started slowing down, his desire to perform never disappeared. For David Allan Coe, giving up was simply never an option. In 2006, he made one of the most memorable appearances of his later career when he appeared in the music video for Johnny Cash's posthumously released song, "God's Gonna Cut You Down." The video brought together a remarkable collection of musicians, actors, and cultural icons, all dressed in black, as a powerful tribute to Cash and the legacy he left behind. When David Allan Coe appeared on screen, he did not sing, speak, or demand attention. He simply stood quietly in the background. Yet somehow, that silence made his presence even more powerful. Dressed completely in black, with a serious expression on his face, Coe looked like a man who carried the weight of an entire lifetime. A lifetime filled with success, mistakes, heartbreak, battles, and unforgettable experiences. Standing among some of the biggest names in entertainment, including Kanye West, Bono, and Johnny Depp, Coe's appearance felt different from everyone else's. While others represented modern fame and mainstream success, Coe represented something older and more unpredictable. He looked like a living reminder of the rougher side of country music, a world built on struggle, honesty, rebellion, and survival. He appeared like someone who had not just written about hardship, but had truly experienced it himself. Even as his health problems increased, and his reputation slowly moved further away from the spotlight, Coe refused to disappear. He continued traveling across America, performing in small towns, biker rallies, and traditional honky-tonks, where his most loyal fans gathered. These were not the massive arenas and mainstream stages of his younger years, but they were places where his music still mattered. The crowds that came to see him were not interested in industry approval, radio rankings, or whether he was considered fashionable by the music world. They came because they connected with him. They came for the stories hidden inside his songs, the rebellious attitude he represented, and the unmistakable voice of an artist who had survived decades of change. As the late 2000s moved into the 2010s, more conversations began surrounding Coe's health and his ability to continue performing. Some fans noticed that his shows had become more unpredictable than before. There were reports of moments where his speech seemed unclear, lyrics were forgotten, or his conversations on stage became confusing. However, others who saw him perform defended him, saying that despite his struggles, he still had the passion, emotion, and powerful presence that had always defined his performances. Now, let's take a step back and discover the man behind the legend, who he really was, where he came from, and how he rose to fame. David Allan Coe. From prison to country. Music legend David Allan Coe was born in Akron, Ohio, on September 6, 1939. From the very beginning, his life was far from ordinary. As a young boy, Coe developed a deep love for music, and one of his biggest early influences was singer Johnny Ace. However, behind that passion was a difficult childhood filled with struggles that would shape the person he would eventually become. At only 9 years old, Coe was sent to the Star Commonwealth for Boys' Reform School, beginning a long and troubled period of his life. For much of the next 2 decades, he found himself moving in and out of correctional facilities, including spending 3 years at the Ohio Penitentiary.
And that's the Ohio Penitentiary. A lot of people, I think, just wouldn't realize.
And time at the Lancaster Industrial School. These experiences would later become some of the most defining parts of his story, influencing both his songwriting and the rebellious image that followed him throughout his career. While behind bars, Coe discovered something that would eventually change the direction of his life: songwriting. He later revealed that Screamin' Jay Hawkins, a musician he met during his time in prison, encouraged him to begin writing songs. By 1963, Coe had already started creating his own music while still incarcerated, using songwriting as a way to express his experiences, emotions, and the difficult world he had known. After completing another prison sentence in 1967, Coe made a life-changing decision. He left his past behind and headed to Nashville, Tennessee, determined to build a future in music. But his journey was anything but easy. With limited money and no permanent place to stay, Coe lived inside a hearse that he parked near the Ryman Auditorium while performing on the streets for anyone willing to listen. His unusual lifestyle, bold personality, and unforgettable appearance eventually attracted attention. One person who noticed his potential was Shelby Singleton, the owner of the independent record label Plantation Records. Seeing something unique in Coe, Singleton offered him a recording contract and gave him the opportunity to begin turning his dream into reality. During this period, Coe was also connected to the Louisville, Kentucky chapter of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. In early 1970, he released his debut album, Penitentiary Blues, introducing audiences to his raw style and honest storytelling. He later toured with the famous rock band Grand Funk Railroad, helping expand his reputation beyond the traditional country music scene. In October 1971, Coe signed an exclusive songwriting agreement with Pete and Rose Drake's Windows Publishing Company, Inc. in Nashville, Tennessee. He remained with the company until 1977, continuing to write songs and develop his craft while searching for his place in the competitive world of country music. Although David Allan Coe quickly gained a loyal following because of his powerful performances, rebellious attitude, and unpredictable personality, mainstream success did not come immediately. However, his songwriting ability began attracting attention when other artists started recording songs he had written. His words and stories connected with performers who saw the potential in his unique style. In 1972, Billy Joe Spears recorded Coe's songs Souvenirs and California Memories. Then, in 1973, Tanya Tucker released Coe's song Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone. The song became a #1 hit and completely changed the direction of Coe's career. It established him as one of Nashville's most respected songwriters and played a major role in helping him secure a recording contract with Columbia Records. Coe later recorded his own version of Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone for his second Columbia album, Once Upon a Rhyme, which was released in 1975. Music writer Tom Urich of AllMusic praised the song, explaining that both Coe's recording and Tanya Tucker's version stood out as remarkable performances. Unlike his first 2 albums, Coe's third album represented a stronger commitment to traditional country music and helped establish his role in the rise of what would become known as outlaw country. The album, The Mysterious Rhinestone Cowboy, reflected the unusual character and image Coe had created years earlier. Wearing sparkling rhinestone outfits and a Lone Ranger-style mask, he developed a mysterious stage presence that made him impossible for audiences to forget. Years later, Coe explained that the inspiration behind his famous rhinestone suits came from Mel Tillis. When Coe first arrived in Nashville, he visited Tillis at his office on Music Row and discovered a closet filled with rhinestone suits. Fascinated by what he saw, Coe admired the outfits so much that Tillis told him he could take them because he no longer wore them. Coe accepted the offer and began wearing the suits everywhere, creating one of the most recognizable images in country music. The idea behind his famous mask also had a personal connection. Coe explained that the inspiration came from his father, who once told him about the Lone Ranger and how he could enter a town safely only by removing his mask. His father explained that wearing a mask allowed a person to separate their public identity from their private life. Coe carried that idea with him and transformed it into part of his mysterious performer persona. Coe's second album, Once Upon a Rhyme, also featured one of the biggest songs of his career, You Never Even Call Me by My Name. The song was written by Steve Goodman and John Prine, and originally appeared on Goodman's 1971 debut release. However, Coe's version became a major breakthrough, becoming his first country top 10 hit and reaching number 8 on the charts in 1975. The song became even more memorable because of its humorous spoken ending, where Coe explained a conversation he had with Steve Goodman. Goodman jokingly claimed he had written the perfect country and western song, but Coe responded that a truly perfect country song needed certain classic elements, including a mother, trains, trucks, prison, and drinking. Taking the challenge seriously, Goodman later wrote an additional verse that included all of those themes, and Coe added it to his recording. The final verse became one of the most famous parts of the song, telling a humorous story involving being drunk, his mother leaving prison, a rainy day, a pickup truck, and a train accident. It perfectly captured the traditional country themes that Coe believed defined the genre. Despite David Allan Coe's controversial rise to fame, his journey was far from over. But were there even more shocking controversies waiting to follow him? Stay tuned to find out. David Allan Coe's most shocking era. By the middle of the 1970s, David Allan Coe had already established himself as one of the most rebellious and unpredictable figures in country music. He had built a reputation as an artist who refused to follow the traditional rules of the industry, and his unique style had earned him a loyal following. But in 1976, Coe pushed that image even further with the release of Long-Haired Redneck. This song was not simply another recording added to his growing catalog. It became a personal declaration, a reflection of his identity, and a powerful statement about the way he viewed himself and the world around him. In Long-Haired Redneck, Coe opened up about living between two completely different worlds. He described himself as someone who never truly belonged anywhere. To the rock audience, he was considered too country, while to many traditional country fans, he was viewed as too wild, too rebellious, and too difficult to categorize. Instead of trying to fit into either side, Coe embraced being different. He turned rejection into confidence and made it clear that he was proud of standing apart from everyone else. The song quickly became one of the defining moments of Coe's career because it captured everything he represented. It reflected his rebellious personality, his independent mindset, and his refusal to hide his true self just to satisfy critics or industry expectations. Through the song, Coe sent a clear message that he had no intention of changing his appearance, adjusting his attitude, or becoming someone easier for the music world to accept. Although Long-Haired Redneck received some attention from radio stations, its greatest success came from the emotional connection it created with listeners. Many fans who also felt like outsiders connected with Coe's message because they understood the feeling of being judged, misunderstood, or rejected by society. The song showed that Coe was not simply another musician participating in the outlaw country movement. He had become one of the clearest examples of what that movement represented: independence, rebellion, and the freedom to live without apology. However, this was only the beginning of the controversies that would surround David Allan Coe's career. Not long afterward, he moved into much darker and more extreme territory with 2 albums that pushed boundaries further than most artists were willing to challenge. The first was Nothing Sacred, followed by Underground Album. These projects would become some of the most controversial releases of his entire career. Unlike his earlier albums, these records were not released through major record labels or made widely available through traditional music stores. Instead, they were distributed independently and circulated through underground networks, including biker magazines and alternative music catalogs. Because they avoided the normal music industry system, the albums reached a smaller but highly dedicated audience that was interested in Coe's most unfiltered and controversial work. The material found on these albums created immediate outrage and debate. The songs contained extremely explicit language, graphic, sexual themes, and content that many listeners considered offensive and unacceptable. Some lyrics included racial slurs and disturbing references that shocked even some of the fans who had supported Coe throughout his career. Mainstream critics, journalists, and many people within the music industry reacted strongly against the albums. They described the material as offensive, shocking, and beyond acceptable limits. Coe faced serious accusations, including claims of racism, sexism, and homophobia, because of the content featured in his songs. Although he denied those accusations and defended his artistic choices, the controversy had already created a lasting impact on his public image. The consequences were immediate and widespread. Many record stores refused to carry the albums, radio stations avoided playing his music, and music journalists openly criticized his work. People in the industry who had previously supported him began distancing themselves from him. Even some artists who had once admired Coe's talent and songwriting ability started stepping away because they did not want to be connected to the controversy surrounding his name. But David Allan Coe did not change his approach. He refused to step back, apologize, or reshape himself to regain acceptance from the mainstream music world. Instead, he leaned even further into the outsider identity that had defined much of his career. As the industry began watching him from a distance, Coe embraced the role of the rebel even more, proving that he was determined to live and create music entirely on his own terms. Behind David Allan Coe's success, was everything really as perfect as it seemed, or did he face struggles that challenged him along the way? Stay tuned to find out. David Allan Coe's hardest years after fame. But even as David Allan Coe's music career continued to reach new heights, the world behind the scenes was beginning to collapse. The success, the fame, and the money that came with his music did not bring the stability many people expected. Instead, the money seemed to disappear almost as quickly as it arrived. Between his unpredictable lifestyle, growing financial troubles, and a long list of legal battles, Coe eventually found himself trapped in a serious financial crisis. And then came one of the most painful losses of his entire career, losing control over the very music that had made him famous. In 1984, during bankruptcy proceedings, Coe was forced to sell the rights to every song he had written before that year, including some of his most successful and influential works, such as Take This Job and Shove It. The entire catalog was sold for just $225,000. But what made the situation even more heartbreaking was that years later, Coe admitted he did not fully understand what was happening until the deal had already been completed. By the time he realized what he had lost, it was already too late. Decades of creativity, countless hours spent writing, and the songs that had helped define a major era of country music were no longer in his hands. The words, melodies, and stories that came from his own life had become something he no longer controlled. For an artist whose identity had always been connected to his songwriting, losing those rights was more than just a financial blow. It was a deeply personal loss. Without ownership of his greatest songs, Coe also lost the long-term financial security that came from the royalties generated by those hits. While many successful songwriters could look back on their past work and rely on that income for years to come, Coe no longer had that safety net. The songs that could have supported him for the rest of his life were no longer providing for him. Instead, he had to depend on the one thing that had always remained within his control, his ability to perform. He returned to the road, traveling from city to city, and playing countless shows to earn a living. Touring was no longer just a way to connect with fans. It became his survival. Night after night, stage after stage, Coe continued doing what he had always done, standing in front of an audience and telling his stories through music. Despite the financial struggles, the disappointment, and the setbacks that followed him, Coe refused to give up. He continued writing, continued performing, and continued living life on his own terms. The industry may have taken away ownership of his biggest songs, but it could never take away the voice behind them. His passion for music remained untouched. As long as there were people willing to buy a ticket, listen to his stories, and hear him sing, David Allan Coe was not ready to disappear. He was never someone who quietly accepted defeat or faded into the background. His entire career had been built around fighting against expectations, and even in his hardest moments, he continued to prove that he was not finished. As the years passed and the music world continued to evolve, many artists from the outlaw country movement began stepping away from the spotlight or settling comfortably into their legendary reputation. But Coe was different. He continued pushing boundaries, searching for new creative challenges, and proving that he still had something to say. One of the most surprising chapters of his later career came in the late 1990s and early 2000s, when he joined forces with legendary Pantera guitarist Dimebag Darrell. Together, they created Rebel Meets Rebel, a groundbreaking project that combined the raw storytelling of country music with the aggressive energy of heavy metal. The collaboration was unexpected, but it perfectly represented who David Allan Coe had always been. He was never an artist who followed traditional rules or allowed himself to be placed inside one specific category. Rebel Meets. Rebel was not just a strange musical experiment. It was another example of Coe refusing to accept limitations. The album was eventually released in 2006 after Dimebag Darrell's tragic death, introducing listeners to a side of Coe that many never expected to see. David Allan Coe's music made him famous, but his story extended far beyond the stage. What was the man behind the legend really like? Keep watching to find out. David Allan Coe, behind the music. David Allan Coe's personal life was just as complicated and unpredictable as his music career. Known for living an unconventional lifestyle, Coe had previously been associated with polygamy and had been married 5 times before he eventually met Kimberly. His relationships were often filled with the same intensity and unpredictability that followed him throughout his life. According to GQ, one of Coe's former wives, Jody Lynn Benham, first met him after leaving Michigan and moving to Nashville in search of new opportunities. After arriving in the city, she found work as a housekeeper at the Opryland USA Hotel. At the time, she had no idea that a simple job opportunity would eventually lead her into the life of one of country music's most controversial and unforgettable figures. While working at the hotel, another housekeeper invited her to visit Coe at a recording studio. That meeting quickly changed the direction of her life. After getting to know her, Coe became interested in her and eventually invited her to leave with him and join him on the road as he continued his music career. Jody later recalled the unusual way their relationship began. She remembered asking Coe, "Couldn't we just, date?" hoping they could take things slowly. But Coe, known for his strong personality and direct approach to life, reportedly responded, "You're either with me or you're not." His answer reflected the same all-or-nothing attitude that shaped many parts of his life. Years later, Coe entered another important chapter in his personal journey when he began dating Kimberly in 2000. According to his Instagram, their relationship grew over time before the couple eventually decided to marry. On April 18, 2010, the two exchanged vows in Las Vegas, marking Coe's 6th marriage and Kimberly's 2nd, according to The Boot. When Coe was later asked why he chose to get married again after experiencing so many relationships in the past, his answer was surprisingly honest. He explained that he had gotten tired of making decisions for myself, suggesting that he wanted the comfort, support, and stability that came with having a partner by his side. Beyond his marriages and relationships, one of the most important parts of Coe's life was his role as a father. He was the father of at least 5 children, including Tyler, Tanya, Cheyenne, and Carson, whom he shared with his former wife, Jody Lynn Coe. He also had another daughter named Shelley. Unlike many musicians who separate their family life from their careers, Coe often brought his children into his world of music. According to GQ, his family became part of the touring lifestyle that surrounded him. They traveled with him, experienced life on the road, and became connected to the same musical world that had defined their father's life. Jody Lynn Coe even supported his career by joining him during performances and playing keyboards at times. Their son Tyler also became involved in music from a very young age, experiencing what it was like to perform alongside his father while he was still just a toddler. Could David Allan Coe's tragic ending mark the end of his legacy? Or will his story continue to live on for generations? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thanks for staying with us as we looked into the tragic ending of David Allan Coe. Now we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on his life before his tragic ending? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to explore more stories. See you there.